Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It just depends on where you're hanging out this morning. I am hanging out in Texas and it's very sunny. And honestly, I think it's getting very, very hot. Dan, where are you located? I don't think that I know that.
I'm in Colorado, so I live in Boulder, and our office is in Westminster, which is kind of between Boulder and Denver.
Yeah, I did not know that. Like, I lived in Arvada for about 6 months, like right at the bottom of the mountains by Golden.
Nice.
Super beautiful area. Yeah, because I had at the time it was like COVID pandemic, and I'd relocated to that area for Twitter, and then boom, the pandemic happens, and no one's
Sure.
going into the office, so that was fun.
Yeah, for sure.
um, yeah, but to actually more officially kick off the show, I would love for you to introduce yourself. Maybe what are you up to? What do you enjoy doing? Whatever it is you'd like to share in your introduction, and we'll kind of dive in to get to know you.
Sure. My name's Dan Moore. I'm a principal product engineer at a company called Fusion Auth. We're an auth provider like an Auth0 or a Cognito, focusing on customer identity and access management. Um, I've been a developer for over 25 years. Definitely worn a lot of hats. Been a CTO, engineering manager, technical trainer, contractor, and then a lot of my time is spent being an individual contributor, which is what I really like doing, where I'm kind of hands-on work, where I'm doing hands-on work. Yeah.
Love
Um,
that.
I I could talk about hobbies and stuff, but let's talk about problems. And this is the show about problems.
It is about problems. It was funny because I started the show like I say it that it was selfishly, but obviously anytime you produce content like this, there's a selfless side to it where folks can get to know other developers and learn, etc. But I just found myself, I was like, like in DevRel, you get sort of pulled away from some of the technology sometimes, right? You're still very embedded in the technology, but maybe you're building with it less, or maybe you're building as an engineer less, like you had mentioned, right? You enjoy being an individual contributor. And so when I started the show, I'm like, I just want to hear about all the technology. Like, what are people building with? What problems are they facing? What are they solving? Cool stuff do they get to do? And so then that's where 99 Dev Problems came about. Is I was like, ooh, let's
Awesome.
talk about all the problems. But hobbies are fun too. So let's start. Let's start with a couple things, and then maybe the hobbies and other things will come out. I would love to hear about how you got to where you are today, right? So from an educational standpoint, or even from like a passion standpoint, were you into technology as a child? Was it something that was just so clear to you? Did you chase down a different path? Do you have formal education? I'd love to just hear that story.
Yeah, I can give you an overview of that. So the way I kind of start my technology journey is actually with a technology called mail merge. I don't know whether you're old enough to
Ooh,
remember that, but like,
I am.
yes. So my parents had a small insurance company, and they were
Mm,
required to send out letters, and they did this where they were basically every month they had to send out a letter saying, "Hey, your insurance is going to be renewed unless you tell us differently."
yep.
And we were doing that all manually, and I got to the point where I understood WordPerfect macros enough, and there was like a database that is called Lotus Notebook or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
30 years ago, 40 years ago. So um, able to merge them together, and it changed. You know, it was cool to build the thing, but what really,
Yeah.
really, really got me excited was seeing all of the toil that it removed, right? Like it was this thing
Oh,
that took
yes.
hours and hours to do, and it was a pain in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was pressing a button, and then we still had to like stamp and fold and stuff, but it was way way easier. So that was kind of the original, and that was in middle school for me that I
That's
was doing that.
amazing.
Yeah, and then I went to college and got a degree in physics from a liberal arts
Ooh,
school because a school because I didn't want to. I wanted to write like science fiction and stuff like that when I chose a
very
college,
cool.
which, hmm, but I ended up doing some work with computers, and this was 98, 99, and
Mm,
that was kind of the tip of the .com bubble, or like
yep.
I guess maybe the peak of it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, I'd learned Perl in that job and did some Java, and then I worked at some consulting shops right afterwards and did some contracting. I don't know how much history you want me to go into, but joined a couple of startups. I think I've been in 5 or 6 startups,
Ooh.
and most of them didn't go anywhere, which,
It happens.
yeah, for sure. But mostly in the Denver area, actually. That's been most of
Oh.
my career has been there. A little bit of San Francisco stuff, but not much. And then I joined FusionOff 5 years ago. I just actually celebrated 5 years, which is
Wow.
the longest I've been in any company as a W-2 employee, which was, 25 years in, I've been
That's
a Rolling
incredible.
Stone. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, like, I feel like most of the time, and, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most of the time that we've known each other, you've been at Fusion Auth that entire time.
Yeah, I did. My first DevRel role was in 2019. So before that, I wasn't doing DevRel. So yeah, I think we definitely interacted mostly at Fusion. I remember putting a job posting in your newsletter when you were doing a newsletter a while ago, and
Yes,
definitely been
yep.
in some of the same communities. And then Flyless over the
Yep.
pandemic, I think you came and presented there, or we were participating. Yeah, so it's been mostly DevRel at Fusion Auth, although about a year and a quarter ago, I stepped away from DevRel, which is
Mm,
why my title is, principal product engineer now. So
mm. I love that. I bet, actually, like, if we could speak to that for a little bit, I think there's some value in that conversation. I think that there's a lot of DevRel folks that sort of like struggle with kind of that DevRel role and being a developer advocate, kind of coming back to right, getting away from the technology side of it. And as a developer advocate, you're obviously still ingrained in that technology, but it's just different, right? You're not building the product. How do you feel now that you've shifted from DevRel back over to sort of that product engineering role? Is that more your jam? Like, do you miss some things? Like, how does that, I guess, feel with that transition?
yeah, I'm lucky enough that this is a little bit of a squishy role. So I definitely am still doing
Mm-hmm.
some DevRel-ish type things, like being on this podcast, right? Is what I would consider to be more of a DevRel or a developer relations kind of
Sure.
opportunity. Um, I think that the move from DevRel for me, because I've definitely seen, I've seen the same stories you've seen where people are like, yeah, I'm
Yep.
going to go either because having a hard time finding a role that's right for me, or because I'm burnt out on all the things that DevRel is expected to do. I
Yep.
don't feel like I left DevRel for that reason. I actually feel like I left it
That's good.
because, yeah, it is good. Actually, I'm thankful for that. Um, I think I left DevRel because it was an evolution of me and my role at this company.
Yep.
And
Okay.
I mentioned before I am an IC, and I
Mhm.
actually have been promoted to be a manager several times in my career, and
Yep.
I'm just not. It doesn't light me up. Right? It doesn't excite me the same way that
Mm.
some of my other activities do. And so I saw that coming at this company where
Yep.
we were growing. And I actually hired a couple of DevRel
Yep.
team
I
members,
remember that.
and I know that they needed a good manager, right? Who like builds processes and systems and like checks in with people. And um, I didn't want to do that, and so I didn't see a way to do that and stay in DevRel. And so we ended up hiring
Mm.
someone to like be that manager. And
Yep.
I still help out and I still like do blog posts and things like that, but it's like not my KPI anymore.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think that the company has benefited, and I've certainly benefited from not forcing me to take on a manager role.
Mhm.
So that would be, for all the people listening or watching right now, like I would say that and actually I just had this conversation with my wife, that it took me this is the third time, and it took an environment of high trust and me being confident in who I was and what I needed and what I
Mm.
offered to
Yeah.
be able to say, no, I don't want this. I've
Yep.
tried this a couple of times, and you don't want me to want this either because, it's just not, I'm an adequate manager, but I'm not,
Yep.
I've definitely seen great managers, and I'm not a great manager.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really like, well, first off, managing DevRel, a team of DevRel people is completely different from managing a team of engineering. I
Sure.
actually just had a conversation yesterday, and it was actually for like a sales opportunity. And so they were talking about sort of like managing sales reps. And like I sort of joked and I was like, it can't be any different than managing DevRel because the thing about all of us, right, in order for us to do DevRel, at least this is how I feel. So I'm really curious to see how you think, is that we're very like outward facing, right? We enjoy people, we enjoy helping people. Maybe it's at the limitation of like helping other developers, right? Is more keen on helping our peers. But there's also this like creativity that comes from DevRel practitioners, right? They just are like, I see something and I want to build it, or I want to create it, or I want to build that bridge or make that resource or write that tutorial, right? And if that's not a part of the business objectives, it is near impossible to redirect that team and those people back to what you actually have to do. So I think like it's beautiful that you can recognize that, because I have learned throughout my career how different and difficult it is to actually manage like a team of DevRel practitioners with sort of all these different ideas and their brains firing in different directions and just trying to keep them on path. And I think sort of with the other side of it, right, is there's a lot of engineers that feel like they have to go into that management track and they just don't want to, right? They just want to be that principal, that leading engineer, right? And they don't want to actually manage people. So I think it's absolutely beautiful when you have that ability to say, hey, that's not for me, and that you can find that place within a company and still have that senior level, right? Have all that beautiful experience, but not necessarily have to manage people.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things to unpack there. I mean, I think the first is there are times when it won't happen, right? And the only way
Yeah.
for you to like find the role that you need is to move on. I've
Yep.
talked to people in that situation too, and it stinks, but like it's better to, as painful as interviewing is, like it's better to move
Yep.
on than to like put yourself in a box. Now, of course, financial
Exactly.
stuff, people have external requirements. I'm not saying go quit as soon as you feel unhappy with any job. Like you need to like
For
take
sure.
care of yourself and your family and all that good stuff. But like you're not taking care of yourself if you're providing financially and you're miserable every day at work either, I would say.
I
Um,
agree.
and then the other thing about the managing Deborah, like I don't know whether it was because I kind of did everything in the COVID era or rolling out of
Mm,
COVID, or and so we didn't do a lot of events when I was running Deborah. Like
sure.
we started to do more this year.
Mhm.
And I honestly didn't find DevRels to be distractible any more than engineers, because I've definitely managed engineers and they're like, oh, I want to use X, or I need to use X to improve my skills or whatever. And you're like, no, actually use Y, because all the other code base is written in Y and we want to like make things consistent. And trust me, long term, 2 years from now, you're going to be happier. But maybe that's just
That's
my
valid.
experience. So
No, I think that's super valid, right? I think engineers can be that same way as well. I think it's what I feel is like so difficult, I think, in DevRel, and honestly, Fusion Off really has seemed to just y'all really just have your stuff together, right? Like it's always just been beautiful and great, and everything that I see that's produced just makes sense. And so you probably are lucky to have amazing people on that team. I think it's more of like when it comes into that creativity point, right? There's some DevRel
mm,
functions that, like, for example, joining one and then bringing in a bunch of different types of personalities and getting them to sort of see, okay, objectively, we're going after this one type of objective, right? Yes,
mhm.
I understand you can have some creativity, but it's been sort of this flexing of the muscle of saying, hey, we've got this objective, similar to what you're saying in terms of we have to build this way. It's like, how do we guide them objectively to build that way, but then also let them be creative, right? And do the things that they want. Just like engineers, they're like, I want it. I want to go build this thing. I see the problem and I want to solve it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true of a lot of creative work, and I'd include like marketing in there and all these things. It's like like this real problem of like we have company goals that roll down, and we need to make sure that we're working towards those company goals while still also keeping people engaged and excited. Because if you're creating the 10th article about SAML just to pick something from Fusion off, like you're
Yep.
going to get bored, right? And so it's like, and that's actually something I remember running into when I started doing authentication, is like how you talk about it in a way that's exciting
Yep.
when it's boring, right? And it should be boring. We don't want login to be exciting. um, but I do want to say that I think that you have probably run into more interesting DevRel problems because of the scale of both kind of size of companies and size of teams that you worked at.
Sure.
And the other thing I'd say is that I think one thing we've benefited from at FusionAuth, which I know you've had some varying experiences with, let's just put it that way, is executive commitment to DevRel. We've
Yep.
been super like supported by the executive team. They
Mm,
understand the value of it, and that gives us a little more. play in terms of what we can experience, but also just trust, right? Like it's really hard
Yep.
to do great work when you're not when you're constantly trying to prove who you are or your value to the company. Like
Yep.
so. Anyway, um, yeah,
Yeah.
interesting discussion about DevRel. I it's been a little while since I've been in that world, and I know you're like deep in it and have been deep in it for a while. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Well, I think it's just interesting too, the piece of it that I think is most interesting for, listeners, right? I would say most of the audience that listens to this is either like developers or founders, honestly, is what the demographics fall into. And I think it's just really good for them to hear like it's okay to not want to be a manager, right? It's a completely validated feeling. And there's still beautiful opportunities for you to be ingrained in a business, right? Like you've spent 5 years at Fusion Off and were able to sort of navigate that, find your footing and still drive massive success for the company, right? And still be a really amazing face for that company, but get to do what fuels you and brings you joy.
Yep. I think that's an amazing point. And like a lot of people look at management as a way to get leverage, right? Because if you
Sure.
are which to be totally blunt leads to compensation, right? Like if you are managing a team of 10 and you make them 20% more effective, that's like an amazing gain for the business. But there's other ways to get leverage. There's
Mm-hmm.
and two of the ways that I've done is writing, whether internal or external, like is a
Ooh.
great way to get leverage, or other kinds of content creation. Like this is a great way to like get leverage. And
Yep.
then another way is training. So
Yes.
internal training or external training, it's a skill set, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
definitely not going to say I'm an expert in it, curriculum development, but it is a great way to extend yourself and get everyone on the same page. And I've had so many people inside the company because I put together a training course for our sales reps, but it now is being used by
Amazing.
our solution engineers and our DevRel
Ooh.
team. And the engineers are like, "Oh, we'll look at this because it's because it's designed for the sales reps. It's really kind of aimed
Yep.
at business problems, but still we're a technical product." And so just putting that together, getting the time to put that together again, I had executive sponsorship. It was fantastic, but like it is now something that is helping us grow and scale and be more effective,
Mm.
a year and a half after I've created it.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Like I just want to double tap into that because well, A, right now my head is like really thinking about more of partnerships, like shifting over to technical partnerships because that is something that I have a major passion in. And so I want to tap into what you did because that's incredibly powerful. One of the first roles I had when I started my business early last year was actually coming in and being a fractional developer go-to-market expert essentially. So they were shifting over to the objective of wanting to bring their API to life and
Mhm.
really getting adoption of that use case, right? Because it scaled usage and it was just a better way to sell. And so they didn't have any technical sales reps at all. And so I
Mhm.
did a very similar thing where I essentially spoke to some of the customers, some of the developers using the platform, dug into some of the use cases. What is this actually being used for? And then was able to bring sort of engineering and product and some of the customers together to paint this beautiful picture of like, this is what the customers are thinking about. These are the problems they have. These are the questions they're going to have. Here's pre answers to most of the questions, right? Here's the compliance packet that they're going to need. Here's an example. Here's the problems that they solved. And that just ended up being so incredibly lucrative for that sales team because now they could turn around and say, I don't know anything about technology. I don't even know what an API is. And they now understood an API, why it was valid, why it was helpful, and just enabled them to be more powerful. So I completely agree that there are these little efforts that when you see the problem and you see the solution and you have all the insights that you can come in, even if you're not the best trainer. I'm not really the best trainer either. I like people and I like talking to people, but it doesn't mean that I know how to create curriculum, but just being able to bring all that together and enable those folks, right? Now your company is seeing the value in that as actual education materials for onboarding into a company or to understanding Fusion Auth. So that's amazing. And I fully agree that there are a lot of non-managerial things that you can do to drive impact just like that.
Totally. Yeah, that's an amazing story. And one of the things that resonated with me with what you just said is that, I'm not, which you were echoing what I said, like, I'm not the best curriculum developer, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's one of the things I love about being a startup or being in a smaller
Mhm.
company is like, you're better than zero, right? Like, and
Yes.
if no one is doing this, then, and you see it's a huge issue. And, I'm not saying go off and to your point about like aligning with company goals. I'm not saying go off and do it like, you know, first of all, you shouldn't do it on your free time unless it's something that you're really, really passionate about and want to learn more about. But I'm not even saying go off and do it like and ignore your other like responsibilities, but like talk to your manager and say, hey,
Yeah.
what are small steps we can do to do this and prove this out? And you'd be surprised. Like I've been a manager, as I mentioned, and like when people came to me with ideas I hadn't thought of, I was thrilled. I was like, "Wow, that's an
Mhm.
amazing thing." And there are managers out there, we've all heard of them, who will squash you and not be happy with that. But most people are good. I firmly believe, and
Yep.
most people are good managers. And those they may say, "Oh, gosh, you really have to get tasks X, Y, and Z done," because they see the bigger picture. But
Yep.
they may also say, "Oh, cool. Why don't we schedule this in for a month from now,
Yeah.
and you can run with it then." So,
Yeah. It's just a great way too to also like, talking about sort of careers and the evolution of careers, right? It's really hard to get a job as an engineer for your very net new first job, right? So if you've learned to code and you're trying to get that first job, but when you can land that first job, right, and you're like, I want to be promoted, I want that junior or entry level removed from my title, like it's just such an empowering thing to be able to sort of witness and see where some of those holes are, right, and bring that, like you said, to your manager or to whomever it might support and help, and present it as a solution. Is this something that the team needs? And I think like the beauty of like developers and engineers in general, like we see that stuff, right? We might not always know how to solve it, but we see it. We see every single pain point inside of the company, and we grunt about it and we talk about it internally or maybe to our peers, right, but it's not always something that we can solve. But when we see those problems and we can raise them and maybe have some level of suggestion, like, man, I tell you what, that's how you elevate your career for sure.
yeah, and I would say it's not. It just doesn't stop with just solving that one problem.
Right.
So one of the major efforts I've done over the last 5 or 6 months is like building out like an internal business intelligence system, and bringing in a
Yes.
couple of. And again, this was a case of like Dan is not an expert at this, but like Dan sees a problem, and
Yep.
we had a couple different data sources, and I put it together, and it has not been like Dan ships it and it's done. And I wasn't the whole person. Like there were definitely other people who were like participating in this and making and enabling
For sure.
this, but I was definitely kind of pushing it. And now I just have to keep reminding people about it. I'm like, hey, we have this
Mhm.
data. Can I create you a report? Can I send this to you? And at some point, I've seen this happen with other efforts I've done. It will take on a life of its own. The sales training
Yes.
stuff has a life of its own now. Like someone else is running
Yes.
them. Someone else is like
Oh.
maybe not updating them, but like is like pushing them forward in different ways.
Yep.
So anyway, to all the engineers that are looking for problems to solve, like pick one and then don't just ship it and then forget about it, because it's almost like an internal marketing problem, right? Like you
Uh-huh.
want people to, who doesn't want people to use their software they built? Everyone does.
Exactly.
But people can't use it unless, I mean, it's the same thing as DevRel, right? They know
Yep.
about it, they know what problem it solves, they know how to get access to it, it's easy to get access to, it's well documented. Like those are all things that so to you people that are new in their career, like if you do that internally for an internal tool, you're like halfway to DevRel if you want to be in
Mhm.
DevRel, right? Like,
Yes.
or halfway to product marketing, or halfway to like sales engineering, social engineering, like you know and this is something that I've seen over my years, is there are some engineers that are perfectly a great thing for them to do. um,
For
I think
sure.
that you can have more impact on the business, be better compensated, and how do I put this? I think you can have more world impact on the world if you live the confluence of like business and technology, right? It's like both
Yes.
are important, and I wouldn't want to just give up either one. So
I fully agree. That is, yes, that's amazing. The business intelligence thing, that is actually really interesting too, because I've actually seen that at a lot of different companies. So oddly enough, when I was at Snap, they didn't have a CRM. And I know that sounds crazy. They had Salesforce for like the ad side of it, right? So more of the actual consumer app. But we
mhm.
were on like a B2B side that was more focused on the software solutions that had been created with Snap Technologies. And so we didn't have a CRM. Salesforce was going to be like 2 years out before we actually could be adopted in that. I know, right? You got to love the Salesforce build outs. And so I'm just like, okay, we already have Airtable procured. Like it's already approved platform. Like I'm just going to run with this. And so I ended up doing the same thing. Right. And so it was like the whole reason it happened is because I just wanted metrics behind my work. And I'm like, if I don't have the data to get the metrics to deliver the reports, then I can't deliver the reports. And so I saw it as this void. And we were using a spreadsheet. I was actually on the partnerships team. And so I was very close to like the people that were tracking that type of work. And so my one of the other engineers on the team and I were talking, and we're both seeing this pain point. And I was like, hey, I already started sort of building this out a little bit in Airtable, trying to work with, understanding the developers that were utilizing the platform. We were in beta, so it was like a little different to have to like track the actual developers and usage and who had access to the product. And long story short, like we brought that into Airtable, and unfortunately, the project finished like right before I got laid off. So I don't know if it's even still alive. But while it was alive for the couple of months, it was absolutely life changing for the partnerships reps because they could go in, they could pull data, they could get the reports, they could see everything that they needed. And it wasn't complicated. I just took an Excel sheet or a Google spreadsheet and brought it in and started creating some filters. But that's the thing about like engineers, right? It's like when we see those problems, we can't unsee them, And so then it's either like chase it down and solve it ourselves or chase it down and advocate for it with other team members. And I think that is something that is like truly remarkable about our personalities and just our mindsets of solving problems. And so, yeah, I guess like words of encouragement to anyone listening of like, if you see a problem, like figure out what it takes to solve it. Maybe it doesn't make sense for you, like you shared, right? To go on your own and try to build something out, but find others, make sure that there's a consensus of that issue and bring it to life because I feel like that's where, and on top of it too, I don't know about you, but like that's when I just feel so powerful. Like I'm just so empowered. I feel so valuable. I built
Yep.
something that is saving people time and changing their day. And like, I don't know, that's what I'm here for in terms of like career wise is like, I just want to solve problems.
Well, and I think I love that sentiment. I love what you just said, but like I would take issue with one thing where you said it wasn't that complicated, right? And I think that's true for you and true for
Yeah,
you with your
valid.
experience, but like it is freaking magic. Like, I mean, honestly, and I look at other pieces of my life and I'm like, you know, my wife does stand-up comedy and like
Oh,
I
that's
see the effort
amazing.
that goes in that. And but when she has a show, it's like magic like to me,
Mm,
but I mean, you
yep.
see all the pieces that go into it. And so I would just say that like solving problems with technology is not that complicated to you and me, but like was magic to
Valid.
those partnership representatives. And that's, yeah. So anyway, other than that, I love that story because that's another point of leverage, right? You made everyone's life easier. You don't know how many countless hours or days of time that you saved everyone with that. And engineers should be on the lookout for that stuff. Again,
Yep.
not saying hair off and do it on your own, but or maybe you do for a half day and then you prove something out. But I mean, that depends on
Yep.
the culture of your company and all those things. But solving those problems is super high value way to like help out your company.
Yeah, I fully agree. Oh man, this has been a great conversation. Okay, so there's a couple of things I'd like to get to know about folks before we wrap up. What is like your preferred technology stack? Obviously, you've been in technology for a very long time, and so that's likely evolved and changed. But if you want to speak to that, maybe like you loved something originally and you've shifted, and maybe you're building in a certain stack now, whatever it is you want to share, but just kind of curious where your preferences lie.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's like the stuff that I would do for like a personal project, and then there's the stuff that I
Mm-hmm.
would do, in a professional context, speaking about being consistent. Like Fusion Auth is in Java, so I read a lot of
Mm,
Java. I don't write a ton right now. It's more kind of SQL and like Markdown and the funny thing about being a developer is the longer you do it, the longer I've done it, the more I've gotten away from actually writing code because of the
got it.
path I've
Yeah.
taken. But
Sure.
yeah, and then kind of personally, I'm actually a member and organizer of the Boulder Ruby meetup, and I
Oh,
still
nice.
love Ruby for the community and for the expressiveness,
Hmm.
and frankly for the size of projects I tend to work on my own. I'd
Yep.
I'd probably reach for Ruby and Rails. So
Interesting. I've had a few guests on the show, Mike Bafuco and Brian Castle. Both of them love Ruby and had passionately spoke about Ruby. And it was like so passionate that it like reminded me of like WordPress, Drupal, some of those like open source communities that are just like truly passionate about their craft and the work and like giving back to the project. And it just has me like so intrigued in Ruby, honestly. And like actually, when I interviewed them, I think that was back in January or February, I was like, I'm going to dive into Ruby. And I haven't done it yet, so I still need to do that. But it's so nice to hear. Like it makes me want to get involved because that is like that to me is the wow, I need to learn how to talk. The developer ecosystems that I thrive in, right? Where community
Mhm.
comes together and we build something beautiful together and it's open source or even if it's not, right? But we're still working together to like make and bring that ecosystem, either level it up or increase it or grow it or whatever. So very, very cool that you like Ruby.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, someone in the chat is saying Ruby is like writing plain English. Okay, well, I absolutely need to check out Ruby then. For sure. For sure, for sure.
awesome. Thanks, Evan.
Okay. Yeah. In your day to day, we kind of talked about, challenges that you faced and things like that, but is there anything exciting that you're currently sort of working through that's a bigger challenge or, something you're building that you can share or talk about? Or personally,
Yeah,
could be a personal
uh,
project too.
yeah. No, I mean, I think um, I am currently actually a big thing that is a goal of mine for this quarter is to publish an article. I've got it placed, but it's about federated credential management. Which
Ooh.
are you familiar with WebAuthn, like passkeys?
No, I have not.
Okay. So anyway, federated credential management kind of builds on top of, I'd say it's like a parallel of passkeys. But anyway, the interesting thing to
Mm,
me is it's like this standard that I've been following kind of loosely for like a couple of years.
sure.
And now I'm digging in and actually trying to write an article about it because it's for a couple of reasons. One, it's become closer and closer to getting shipped. It's actually live in Chrome and Edge right now.
Ooh.
Um, and to me, it's like you're digging into something that's moving. It's a technical standard. There's a lot of, um, I just came from a meeting of the community group actually, and it's a lot of like browser implementers talking about like browser specific things. The whole
Mm,
premise of this is they're trying to let us do login with Google, single sign on with SAML, etc., in a more privacy conscious way using
yes.
browser basically the browser mediating it as opposed to being like a forum post and a redirect, which is what we all use right now when we're doing that. So
Yes, yes. I know what you're talking about now. I misheard you when you're talking about passkeys. Now I understand what you're saying in that regard. Because yes, absolutely been exposed to them. There are even a couple of platforms that are using those today, right? You can create them in one password and have those
yep.
passkeys and be able to go and utilize them. Now I understand what you're talking about. Well, that is really cool because I think that is a really beautiful opportunity, honestly, because like I think that's the biggest thing is, when I first started in tech, I was like, I'm going to join all the things, join Twitter when it first came out, join Facebook when it first came out, kind of like you want to join all those things, right? But then now I look back and look in all of my Chrome passwords I've ever saved, all of my Safari
Mhm.
passwords I've ever saved, and it's like I'm constantly getting a data breach email through my credit reporting updates because it's like I've had so many accounts that it's going to consistently happen. And so I think it's just a beautiful world if we can get to a place where it's more about having those keys, right? Instead of a password that someone can literally dig up and find and share on the dark web.
Yeah, and just to be totally clear, like FedCM and the way that federated credential management is related to passkeys is that they're both like a browser effort. I think
Sure,
passkeys are more mature, and federated credential management isn't like a passkey solution. But
sure.
I guess the takeaway is less about the actual technology. It's more like how do you like jump into a standard? Like if you go join the W3C or OpenID
Yep,
Foundation or IETF, and I've been intimidated for a long time about those kind of organizations because they're full of a lot of smart people, which is why we implement their standards. But like
sure.
you can actually dip your toe in, and I found them to be very welcoming. Um,
Mhm. I agree.
and so, yeah, so that's a challenge I've undertaken is to try to take this standard that is kind of it's still in flux a little bit and still being developed and being
Mhm.
developed at a very technical level and like turn it into something that like normal devs like me can actually determine like, hey, is this something to be aware of? How would I implement this? Do I need to care about this? When do I need to care about this?
Yes. Oh, that's amazing. Well, I'm excited to see that work as it comes out because, sometimes that's a lot of what we need in our day to day, right? Is like there's so much technology. There's so many things that you could dive into, so many ways that you can learn. Like I remember like, and you probably can relate to this, right? Like when I was an engineer, you'd build full stop, right? Beginning to end from the server infrastructure to just everything involved, right? It was like you built the whole thing. And
Totally.
nowadays there's just so much going on. Obviously the world has evolved, things have changed. Security is far more important, right? There's a lot more people that can get into your code, but we can't keep up with all that stuff, right? There's just no way to know everything. And so people like you diving into that and creating and writing and teaching the rest of us developers is like, I think what makes the developer ecosystem world go round, right? Is this ability to learn from each other and just share.
Definitely, I mean, I don't want to pretend, I don't want to puff myself up and say that that's the most important piece, right? Like, we gotta have builders too, but yeah, I mean, there's so much going on, having trusted sources, or even just, um, yeah, people that like take the time to explain something as opposed to making you dig into the code helps
Yes.
everybody so much. So.
Yeah. And I think too, like in this AI world, right? If you can produce more content that can take something extremely technical and complicated that is maybe sort of hidden in different areas of the world and making it more public, I think that's valuable too, because then it's obviously content and documentation that's being contributed to those models and being able to pull from the internet and say, oh, Dan wrote an article about this. Cool. I now can sort of consume this and have a better understanding. And hopefully AI can use that to better explain answers as people need it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point about AI. And actually, I wrote a blog post recently about looking at like what we had done and kind of the effects we've seen from AI because we're an authentication provider. There's maybe some scope for AI in our product in some ways,
Hmm.
but we haven't done a ton of that. But we've definitely been on the forefront of like AI for discoverability, AI
Hmm.
chatbot in our docs, creating
Yes.
LLMs.txt, and we've seen we ask people how they heard about us, right? Every time that they download and install our software, and you can say we get a lot of people say other and like blah blah blah, right? Or I don't want to tell you, or but we have people that can tell us, hey, heard about you through Google, heard about you through blah blah blah,
Mm,
and we've definitely seen a substantial uptick in heard about you through ChatGPT/LLMs, and so devs are totally
yes.
using this for discovery, which is
Yeah.
great. Like I do it for discovery too. If
Mhm.
you're working on a product, founders out there, don't sleep
Yep.
on making great docs that can be ingested into LLMs so that they will refer you as a solution for the problem space you're in.
Yes. Oh, I completely agree. Well, I don't know if you saw some of the news of like people are seeing the like sort of massive downside, like media specifically, of not getting redirected, right? Because Google's instantly like, let me just give you an AI response. And they're not going to say, oh, go to this news. Or if they do, they've recapped the story, right? And told what they think is important. So I think that, that's incredibly important. It's been interesting too in my business. One of them is called Layer, so I strongly recommend that folks check that out. But it's essentially this tool that comes into your docs and sort of expands upon that, right? And so then
Mm.
it says, "Hey, let me teach me what I need to know about your API, about your infrastructure, about everything that you're doing." And then that comes alongside inside of VS Code or Cursor or whatever the IDE is. And so a developer literally right there has access to your API documentation, which I think is so important, especially like I'm sure you've experienced, but every once in a while you'll get that API that's like, oh, you have to be a user or you have to log in to get the documentation. And it's like, that is not doing you any good for what you're capable of. Because at least for, well, I would say for most, right? It's the documentations. We dig right into those docs to figure out what can this tool do? What limitations does it have? How does it do it to make sure we haven't tried that solution before? And I just think surfacing that to AI, like you said, is just so incredibly valuable. So those that have invested heavily into content really have the upper hand right now when it comes to that.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to that. I think that's totally true.
Yeah, right. Well, kudos to you all for being able to do that, right, and be able to implement that, and then now see growth in a new way, right, with this new era.
Yeah.
Um, Arvin's a very active contributor usually to the show, which I really appreciate.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure that that's some scary stuff, right? When you're creating different tools and getting those legal notices immediately. So, all
Yeah,
fun times with AI these days.
for sure.
All right, Dan, where can folks find you and get to know you and read some of the awesome content that you create? Maybe learn about Fusion Auth.
Yeah.
Throw me a
Uh,
few domains and URLs or wherever.
Sure. I'll send them on to you too. But fusionauth.io is our website, and fusionauth.io/docs is our technical documentation.
Lovely.
We have articles that are kind of vendor neutral, and then we have our technical docs that include APIs and use cases and all that stuff. I also
Love that.
blog about customer identity access management in a newsletter
Mm,
called CIAM Weekly, so CIAM Weekly
love
dot
it.
com. And I have my original blog. I've been blogging since 2003 at moreds.com, which is kind of my
Mhm.
handle here. So yeah, but would love to connect. And I'm also on Blue Sky and LinkedIn um, and Slacks, a lot of different Slacks. So, but yeah, would love to connect with anybody who's watching. So, and
I
thank you
love
so much for having me, Tessa. This was a really fun conversation.
Of course, like, they're very fun for me. Like I said, it was selfishly intended. I'm like, I just want to talk to more developers and hear what they're building and what they're up to, and, it has been so fun to do the show. So I really appreciate you coming on and having this conversation with me and allowing our guests to listen in and, engage in the chat. So this has been lovely. I hope that everyone has a fabulous rest of their Tuesday, and we'll catch everyone soon.